All right, we're getting started. He's here last minute, but that doesn't mean he's not ready. He's the best activist in the state. He runs Free State Colorado. He is the best RV salesman on the Front Range. Give it up, Brandon Wark.
Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. How's everybody doing tonight? Doing good? Doing good? Awesome. Right on. So, I want to start off touching a little bit back on something we talked about last year, and that's about politics in terms of, is it worth it or not? Is it worth getting involved in politics, right? Because there's a lot of people who are libertarians, believe in liberty, believe in freedom, and they just see the waste, right? Because it doesn't seem like we can win. It doesn't seem like we can make a difference. At least that's the impression. But I got to tell you, we can win. And we are winning on the local level, right? I don't think there's much we can do about the federal level, of course. This is why this talks about Colorado politics. In addition, well, it's supposed to be about that anyway with our scheduled speaker. But ultimately, I wouldn't want to talk about federal politics because there's really not much we can do in my mind, right? Unless you're a multimillionaire, a billionaire, if you're somebody with a lot of money and a lot of influence, a lot of power, sure, you can have a voice in federal politics, but you really can't for us, the average person, right? But we can in our local communities. When's the last time has anybody here gone to a city council meeting this year? Maybe your local city council meeting, anybody? No? And a lot of them are more accessible than ever. You can even get online. Like I was at the Greeley City Council meeting virtually last night and was able to speak and pay attention and make some clips of some people's speeches and really get involved at that local level. But ultimately, we can have a say. There's very few people who are actually participating in politics at the local level. So that makes our influence very outsized, especially when you come up to the national level. So right now, I live up in Greeley and I've been involved in this ballot fight and we won. We won this David versus Goliath story where we had citizen activists coming together across party lines, right, left, uniting to push back against a massive expansion in government. So the city of Greeley had a plan they've been working on for years, mostly behind the scenes with the big developer, to build $1 billion entertainment complex. $1 billion, folks. And this is Greeley. Greeley's not one of the biggest cities. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's still the 9th largest city, but it's not that big ultimately, right? $1 billion expansion in local government, specifically having a stadium for the Colorado Eagles, which is the AHL minor league hockey team, the affiliate for the Avalanche, and then a hotel water park, like the Great Wolf Lodge or whatever that other one's called, you know what I mean? And the city was going to own it. I mean, from my perspective, it was an easy answer in terms of this is not the proper role of government, right? This is not something the government should do. I mean, should the government own a hotel? Does anybody think that's a good idea? Like, as a money-making business, right? But the truth is the developer could only actually make it happen if the city was involved. So that's a red flag right there, right? If you can't financially sustain the project or find it viable over time without some sort of government involvement, then that's really a big sign that it's not a good project ultimately. So the biggest problem with this issue is that the city didn't want to have the citizens have a say. The city didn't want to put it to the vote. Like Jason was fighting against this debt package in Denver last year, but Denver asked the voters, right? The city of Denver took out $1 billion worth of bonds, basically, and they asked the voters to take on this long-term debt. Of course, in Greeley, they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to ask the people to say, should we get involved in this project, get in this relationship with this developer for 30, 40 years, build a massive stadium and all of this. So that was the first problem. The second problem was that they were really hiding things, it seemed. They weren't transparent in terms of the entire process. There were studies done. The city paid 5 different analyst companies to go in, to study, to look at the viability, and they wouldn't release it to the public. We used CORA, the Colorado Open Records Act, to get that information out to the public. And actually, one of the city's own consultants said this project was not financially viable at this time. So a big project, that's a big reason why they didn't want the city to vote on it, the people to vote on it, or the people to really know all the details behind the scenes. So we came together as a grassroots group of individuals to create this group, an issue committee up there, and we got 8,000 signatures to get it on the ballot. So this is a citizens initiative, folks, using our power of the referendum that we have here in Colorado. So we got it on the ballot, and then the city sued. The city sued to stop it. And they said basically because we were trying to overturn the financing, they're using certificates of participation to circumvent Tabor, that whole story. They sued and the judge ruled in their favor and said, yes, that was an administrative action, not a legislative action. So the election was canceled. The special election was canceled. So we didn't give up though. We got another 8,000 signatures to get another special election, which just concluded this last week. So a week ago yesterday, the voters of Greeley voted yes on 1A to overturn the zoning that the city created for this big project. Phenomenal stuff. I mean, they say you can't fight City Hall, but we did, and we won. We beat the mayor, the city council. and $1 billion, one of the wealthiest people in Weld County. It was wild. And I was fighting, I'm a libertarian, a proud libertarian. I was fighting Republicans, teaming up with some Democrats. Like it doesn't matter. It's issue, right? It's the principle and the issue that matters. It doesn't matter what party you are. So anyways, that's a huge story. And it's really a sign, because I thought we were going to lose. We were outspent 10-1. I mean, this developer, this company was going to make hundreds of millions of dollars over the next 30 years, right? And it's all the risk is on the city, because if it fails, the city has to make up the difference for the debt service if the revenue's not there, right? So they invested hundreds of thousands of dollars, paying consultants 10 grand a month, more than that, to come in. It has signs, internet ads, radio ads, everything you can think of. AI slop ads on Facebook, embarrassing stuff. But they spent so much money to get this done, and we had nothing. We had a group of grannies, ultimately, out there in the rain, collecting signatures outside of King Soopers to get this on the ballot. And one of the craziest things was last Tuesday, our victory party was next door to the other side's victory party. They were in this fancy restaurant, the mayor's in there, the city council members, all these developers, nice suits, expensive suits, right? In this place, big expensive place, big party. And then I had to walk by it to get to our party. And literally it's like 12 silver-haired ladies are sitting in there. You know what I mean? Up later than they usually are to celebrate this victory. But it shows that grassroots can work, grassroots can win. And it's phenomenal. It's a true story. It's a true inspiration that as individuals, if the issue's right, if the community is behind it, we can overturn what the city government decides. And the same thing is happening here. What's that? Martin Lind is his name. I could talk to you about it later, but so this is what's fascinating. And I think so much in politics, right? When you hear politics, what do you think of? You think of Donald Trump, you think of Iran, you think of Israel, right? You think of all these big things. When you talk to politics to your neighbor or your coworker, they're going to say, oh my gosh, yeah, isn't it crazy what's happening in Washington? Or isn't it crazy what's happening in the Middle East? That's what most people think about politics. But the reality is politics is happening in our own communities and our own neighborhoods, and we can have a huge impact at that local level. It's ultimately the only place we can have an impact. But we can ultimately have a voice and get organized and be the leaders to fundamentally transform our cities, our counties, and ultimately our state. So in Lakewood's doing the same thing right now. So Lakewood, the city of Lakewood, at the request of our state government, wants to put this high density housing in, right, along these mass transit corridors. That's been the plan for a few years that our state government's been really pushing. You can call them 15-minute cities, you can call them whatever you want, but the reality is they're trying to, at the state level, create this top-down approach to make high density housing in communities that don't want it, right? So, you think of these homeowners who got their retirement home, maybe they've lived there forever. They love the quality of life. That's why they moved to that community. They love the parks, being close to the mountains, whatever it is. And now the city comes in and says, well, hey, the state's telling us if we want to get the grant money, we want to get this tax money, we have to rezone this. And we have to make it all high density housing along Colfax, along these different areas. So all of a sudden, the dynamic changes. So the city went with it. This happened last year. The city passed 3 different zoning initiatives basically to build high density housing. The community was outraged. The community didn't want this. So the community came together and they actually started a special election. They had 3 different ballot questions to repeal each of the 3 different zonings. And there's going to be a special election. I think it's in March coming up here. April's the special election. April 4th. 4 issues on an April special election. So this is phenomenal, folks. This is grassroots individuals from across all party lines, people who maybe don't agree on anything else, but saying we want to stand up for our community. We have a vision of what we want for our city, and we live here. We're the people here. Why should these other people decide for us? It's the ultimate form of democracy, ultimately. So this is happening in Lakewood. It's phenomenal to do this, to fight City Hall, and you wouldn't believe the arrogance and the attitude of these politicians, right? At our city council last meeting in Greeley, city council says, the people don't have all the information we do. We get all the information, and that's why we make these decisions. And don't get me wrong, they obviously have more information than us. But if they're not communicating it to us, if they're not transparent about it, and they're not asking our permission after presenting the information, then are they really representing us at the city level? No, of course not. So this is happening in Greeley. We just won. Lakewood's going through a very similar type of thing to repeal zoning to keep the character of the city they want. This is a phenomenal story it's being reported, but only on the margins. There's a couple articles here and there about it, but this is a big story about what's happening here in Colorado. And I really do believe we can enter this new era of citizen involvement where individuals show up to city council meetings, you meet people, you understand what's happening in your local community, and use social media to get organized. And all of a sudden now you have a group of dedicated and motivated individuals who are going to be involved in the most local level and most important level possible, whether it's fixing a pothole in your street, making sure the character of your city stays the same, maybe supporting local businesses, or fighting against Buc-ee's. This is similar to what happened down in Palmer Lake, if you remember this story. I mean, Buc-ee's withdrew their application because the citizens were pushing back. The city, if you can call it city, and this is how I understand it at least, but they did withdraw their application, but the people didn't want it, ultimately. There was a huge outcry. Enough of the people didn't want it. Of course, maybe some of them did, but there was enough outcry, they actually withdrew it. In Douglas County, there's something similar going on too with a huge rec center. A lot of people who live there don't want it, and the county commissioners are pushing it. And I got phone calls the day after our election from people from Douglas County saying, how can we do this here? They're trying to do this, and it's going to be, and they can give you a laundry list of reasons why they don't want this project, but at the very least, they want to put it to a vote. At the very least, put it to a vote of the people and see if it's what the people want and not these politicians who think they know better than us, right? So it's fascinating, folks. And I think that's one of the most inspiring things that's happening that a lot of people aren't aware of here in Colorado is the power we have as individuals. And of course, the Citizen Initiative has been a powerful tool over generation. It's how we got Tabor, our Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, which I know everybody in the room loves, but at the same time, we can do so much. Term limits, campaign finance, all of this stuff came through the Citizen Initiative process, a lot of our sunshine laws. And there's potentially, thanks to Independence Institute and others who are pushing this new transparency project, this team transparency, we might have another ballot initiative later this year, a citizen referendum to enshrine the right to transparency, to open government in our state law and state statute. And that's phenomenal. That's exciting stuff. But it shows the power of the people. We can do it ourselves. So when you get frustrated with the politicians and you say they're not doing anything, well, we can do it ourselves, right? We don't need them all of the time to be able to do the things that we think are right. So at the local level, that's the biggest lesson, one of the most exciting things happening in Colorado right now, for sure. Moving on to the state legislature, gosh. So we're only, 50 days in, something like that. So not even halfway through the state legislative session. Starts in January, ends in May, 120 days. It's been wild. A lot of people think, hey, it's going to be an election year, so maybe not a lot of stuff's going to happen, right? Because people are going to be a little more reserved. No, that's not the case this year. But I got to tell you, I'm actually pleasantly surprised with some of the bills we've seen. Privacy, data privacy, privacy of your information. This has been one of the hot topics, and for me, it was unexpected, but it's been great. We actually have a bipartisan coalition of what I would say the best Republicans there, Linda Zamora-Wilson in the Senate, Representative Ken DeGraff in the House, working with Democrats like Jennifer Bacon, the Assistant Minority Leader, who are sponsoring bills together to basically rein in the surveillance state and put a stop to it, right? We saw this huge fight in Denver last year. Yeah, you have a question?
Well, okay, so if they care so much about our privacy, then why are they saying that we need to provide a driver's license to age verify when you install an operating?
I'll get to that. I'll get to Senate Bill 51 here. So right now, we saw it last year, right? The big fight over flock. And a lot of it had to do with the illegal immigrants, right? I mean, that's the reality of it, right? We don't want the city of Denver, the city council, the mayor, they don't want this information going to ICE, going to report and use it to go after illegal immigrants. You have Cobalt, who's the big abortion fund in Colorado, worried that the surveillance systems are going to be used to go after people coming from Texas to get abortions here in Colorado. And then you have everybody on the right who says, well, what about our gun rights, our right to privacy? We hate the government generally speaking. So we don't want to be tracked and surveilled, so it's this great bipartisan opportunity here. There's certain things in Colorado I think we can really work together on ultimately. Transparency and trying to stop the surveillance state. So this year in the state government, we had a bill being heard last week in one of the committees I testified on, Senate Bill 70. I put out a video on it this morning. 5 hours of testimony and discussion. 5 hours. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not unusual in the state capitol to get a lot of debate, but oftentimes it's the gun bills or a transgender bill, whatever. It's the more controversial stuff, but it shows that this issue is really striking to the heart. And I got to say it was mostly in favor. So what Senate Bill 70 ended up doing after being amended is limiting the use of the government being able to use these ALPRs, these automatic license plate readers. That's the flock stuff. Basically limiting their use so they can't track us and build this narrative of everywhere we go. So it's limiting the historical information that they can have access to. Now, of course, there's exceptions. If there's a warrant, there's a subpoena, there's anything along that. If they're even given an opportunity for emergency action, if there's can be a justification there, the court would have to decide that later on. But say somebody literally just shot somebody and then they're using it immediately to find them. That kind of stuff would be allowed. But generally speaking, you'd have to get a warrant and go through proper channels in order to get access to our data. So they couldn't say, type in your license plate in the system and say, where's he been all day? And let's build a pattern of where they're going, But it was so fascinating to hear the conversations where we had the ACLU speak, Cobalt, some of these immigrant groups, and then a lot of people on the right as well who are speaking on it. The only people who were against it were the DAs and the cops, of course, right? That was a big part of it. The cops, and don't get me wrong, the stories were pretty convincing because they got up there and they say, hey, there was this drive-by shooting. We had a partial description of the vehicle. We typed it in the system and we were able to find them in 10 minutes or whatever. Without this, we don't think we ever would have found them. This crime would have gone completely unsolved. I mean, you know, when they're sitting up there and they're telling these stories and they have victims up there saying, yeah, they caught the guy who killed my brother using this technology, it's compelling. Don't get me wrong, but I still think we need to find that balance, obviously, between our privacy and our expectation of privacy. And there was a lot of talk about the different court cases and third-party doctrine and all of this and that during the state capitol this last week. But ultimately, Senate Bill 70 passed. It passed out of committee with the Republican and Democrat sponsors on it and 5 hours of testimony and every district attorney and cop in the state testifying against it. Phenomenal stuff. That's exciting for a libertarian, right? We had Senate Bill 71, which is very similar, except it also goes to drones, facial recognition, and other types of cameras. Basically, that the government just doesn't have carte blanche access to this data. They really need a warrant or be involved in an active investigation. That bill's still going through the process here. But the one I'm most excited about was heard last Wednesday. And it was wild because I host the Northern Colorado Liberty on the Rocks. So I wanted to testify. You know, I love testifying, listening on the committee hearings and this and that. But I was like, I got to go to Fort Collins for our Liberty on the Rocks. Had a great time. And I was like, oh, how did they vote? You know, it's 10 o'clock at night, maybe a little later, driving home. Pull up my phone. I'm like, oh, the committee hearing's still going. 7 hours, over 7 hours of debate and discussion on House Bill 1037. It was absolutely wild. This is the Fourth Amendment is Not for Sale Act. Natalie, I think you spoke on that one. Natalie spoke on it. We had people from all across Colorado speaking on it. Basically what this bill would do, and this is for Representative Ken DeGraff, the best Republican we have, Assistant Minority Leader Bacon, one of the highest ranking Democrats in the state house, working together on this. And she even said this wonderful line that made it in the Denver Post this week, where she said, when this liberal from Denver is next to this libertarian from Colorado Springs, you know something's happening. You know, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but she basically said that. And it's exciting. And it was wonderful to see. Of course, we had all the cops and the DA show up, but nonetheless, 7 hours of testimony, 7 hours of testimony going back and forth saying, hey, listen, if the government wants our data, they need to get a warrant. They can't circumvent the Fourth Amendment and say, hey, Mr. Data Broker, we're just going to pay you and you're going to give me all their information, all the metadata. I want every cell phone that was in this area. You know, who's been driving up to Cheyenne to go buy firearm magazines? You know what I mean? Or who's been circling these abortion clinics, whatever it is, right? This data is out there and available. Who's been looking online at certain things? You know, it's basically investigators looking for a crime ahead of time to, not that they're investigating you, but they're looking at all the data, seeing where they can find somebody who might be committing a crime. So phenomenal bill, really exciting stuff. It did get laid over. The bill is very close to passing. I'm fighting a lot of Republicans right now, Republican leadership who doesn't want this bill to pass because they got the cops and the DAs telling them to do what they want to do. So they're working with them. So it's little bit of a challenge because there's a couple Democrats in that, even though the Democrats have the majority, there's a couple of them like Representative Espinoza, who's a former judge. You got Sean Camacho, who's a former cop. And some of these people they don't like this bill because they're more on the side of the law enforcement here. So if they get those two with the Republicans, then this bill's not going to make it out of committee. If this bill makes it out of committee, we have a good chance of getting it to the floor and getting it passed. So it's exciting stuff. But this is happening in our state government where we actually have an opportunity to preserve our privacy rights, expand the protections that we have as individuals to have this presumption of privacy in our own communities. It's really exciting stuff, folks. Another one coming up is civil asset forfeiture. And Representative Ken DeGraff, he has been the standard bearer to reform it, to get rid of it, to turn it into criminal asset forfeiture where they can't confiscate your assets unless you've actually been convicted of a crime. He's been the standard bearer for years. Every year he's been up there. 3 years in a row now, I want to say. He's been sponsoring that bill. It dies in committee every time. This year, he's actually working with the Democrats, and Assistant Minority Leader Bacon, Jennifer Bacon, is on the bill. And so there's a really good chance we actually might see substantial civil asset forfeiture reform and massive privacy protections passing this year out of our state house. Go ahead.
I just have to make an observation. When I saw the left reaction, the Democrat reaction to what happened in Minnesota, I was like, you know what, this is our time to explain everything we know to these people about why they are legitimately, you know, they should distrust the state.
You know, and you bring up a great point. So there's a lot of skepticism about government in general, right? And it's a shame that it has to be a partisan issue, right? And part of my speech I gave on Senate Bill 71 was saying, hey, this is an American tradition if there ever is one. It's skepticism of government power, going back to our country's founding. I made the point, imagine if during the COINTELPRO era in the 60s, when the government's going after all these activists and anti-war groups, and they had this technology, they have license plate readers and they can track everybody's movement. I mean, imagine, what that would be like. It would not be good. We'd see abuses beyond recognition. So thankfully, there is some opportunity. It was very interesting. Actually, on some of the gun bills, I want to say with Senate Bill 4 this year, there were several people who have explicitly identified themselves as Democrats or left-leaning and said specifically like, hey, listen, don't take our guns away. Don't do this. We understand, and I remember the testimony clearly. I was watching it. And this guy's like, yeah, no, the government's not to be trusted. And as a libertarian, I say, yes, thank you. Let's work together to not trust the government, right? There you go. Guns are about protecting each individual, regardless of who they are, right? So it's phenomenal stuff, exciting stuff there. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not all roses. It's not all good. There's a lot of bad, of course, going through our state government. You brought up Senate Bill 51. This is one that's getting a lot of attention. It just passed out of the state Senate yesterday on third reading, and it's going to be making its way to the state house. So basically what Senate Bill 51 is a mirror of California's bill they passed earlier this year. Our bill is going to take effect a year later in January 2028. California's bill starts January 27, I think, or it's either later this year. I can't remember. But they explicitly mentioned ours is going to be a year later, just in case California's bill, once it takes effect, has any kinks to be worked out. It gives us more time to actually amend it if needed. But basically what Senate Bill 51 does, I'm going to read you what a legislator sent me today because they were not happy. I got a phone call on my way down here because they weren't happy about, and I'm not going to say who they were, but they weren't happy about my characterization of the bill. And they weren't happy that they got messages from people in their community or constituency, wherever it is, saying that they were being called out for voting for this Senate Bill 51. So Senate Bill 51, here's their side of it. This is what they say. Senate Bill 51 is a common sense child protection measure that prohibits the sale of sensitive information to third-party data brokers. The bill does not mandate age verification or create a government registry of sensitive information. Instead, when a digital device is set up for a child, a parent or guardian selects or indicates the child's age group. And application developers receive an age signal, a general age bracket identifier before a user accesses a platform, allowing services to apply their existing age-based access rules. The bill also prohibits phone companies, websites, and digital applications from selling or distributing this information to third parties, ensuring that Colorado children's privacy remains protected. So, of course, how do you want to wrap up your laws? Protecting the kids is always one of the most convenient ways to do it. So basically, Senate Bill 51, it's every operating system that would be sold in Colorado. So think of phones and computers primarily. You get your device, it'll be mandated, it'll be under Colorado state law that operating system has to ask you for an age or an age range. Or you can put an age or a birthday in is how I think it is. And then that information's kept in the system, in the OS, and then it transmits that age signal. So when you want to access a website or a app or some sort of platform, they'll get that signal saying what age bracket you fall into, and then they can determine appropriately what they want to do. So if you for example, you get a phone for your kid, and I can get it, right? It's always interesting to see their side of the story, right? So you get a phone for your kid. I don't know why you're doing that, but you're getting a phone for your kid. I don't know why that's a good idea. And then you say, they're only 10 years old. Okay, great. So now when they get on Roblox, they know they're only 10 years old. I don't know how that's helping anything, but then they can't get on maybe a more sensitive website, right? Something that maybe is not meant for kids, right? Pornography, something like that we can think of. So that's ultimately the idea. Now, of course, from a liberty perspective, the government shouldn't be mandating whatsoever anyway that we have to have access to our computing devices, or that companies can't sell operating systems in Colorado unless they have this built in. It's causing a lot of consternation online. Twitter, the X has been blowing up on this issue because it's not just Colorado, it's California, it's states all across the country. We're seeing it in other countries as well. So it's this huge debate. I don't know, but what do you guys support Senate Bill 51? Raise your hand. What do you think? It's a good idea? Is this going to be a common sense measure to protect kids? Or do you oppose it? Can I get a show of hands, anybody? I mean, do you like the idea, the idea that, the state's going to mandate this? And of course, part of my argument is, the slippery slope fallacy is a fallacy, don't get me wrong, but this is how it starts, right? We know how things go. First, it's this, and then they say, well, too many people have been lying. And this was very interesting. I listened to the entire committee hearing on this bill, or that was earlier this week, and so many of the people that came out against it were saying it's not strict enough. And they said, and so many of the people, these older or, middle-aged white women basically getting on there and saying, and having some real stories. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to minimize the losses they had. My kid bought fentanyl and died from Snapchat. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that, right? But at the same time, so they were saying oppose this bill or amend it. You need to put it so you have to put somebody's facial, you have to take a picture of their face and the computer's going to recognize the age of their face, or you have to upload your ID. Like that's what people are asking our legislators to do this in our state capitol right now. It's absolutely wild to sit there and listen to this without pulling my hair out, right?
How can they square that, how can Democrats say they care so much about children when they just said, there was recently another bill where they would make a registry that would keep sex offenders from being rehired in schools. And so, I recall they used the term duplicative to argue against that would keep these pedophiles from preying on children and filming them doing.
I want to say that was 1055 or so. That was marked Senator Baisley's bill, but I think it went to the House first. Well,
do everything to protect children by invading their privacy, but they won't keep sex offenders from being rehired.
No, there's a lot of good questions, and that's politics, right? But it was very interesting. And actually, I got to give a little bit of credit to the bill sponsors like Matt Ball. And they basically got on there and they said, yeah, we know it's not as restrictive. We're trying to strike that balance. We don't think it's a good idea to upload a driver's license. This is from the Democrat bill sponsors. We don't want to go down that route. So this is the alternative. This is the common sense way to do it without moving in that without doing that. Now, of course, we all know that, a year down the road, they're going to say, well, actually, you need to have your digital ID, or 2 years from now. You know what I mean? That's just the nature of government. The nature of government is to expand and to keep growing into every corner of our lives, right? But there was a bill basically that Senator Baisley put together working with Jefferson County Schools to basically track people who were fired from schools based on performance issues. And he brought up the issue, and the testimony was phenomenal to listen to. I did a video on it in Free State, Colorado, but there was situations where a guy got fired from Poudre schools because he was being inappropriate around the kids and taking photos with them and stuff like that. But it wasn't enough to get criminal charges. He didn't break the law, but it was enough where we don't want you working here. This is not good for you to be here. And then he ended up getting a job in Jefferson County Schools. And then he actually sexually abuses a child. Signs were there that it was going to happen. So Baisley's bill was basically to create a registry to say, if you're fired in one school, the Department of Education in Colorado would have it. And if you're fired in one school, that's going to be recorded. And then, so when you go to get hired somewhere else, they're going to check. And the school districts didn't like that bill. The teachers union, the teachers unions were one of the only people who testified against the bill. And they basically said, and I get it, they're looking out for their workers. They don't want anybody to be out of a job and then not able to get rehired. And they said, hey, if it's serious enough, they should be arrested. So that was their argument. I don't necessarily agree with that, obviously, but that was one of the big things. So transparency, a big issue at the state capitol. Guns is a big thing. We just had on Monday on third reading in the state house, the 3D gun printing bill pass. Has anybody been following this at all? Obviously, 3D printing is a huge deal. Josh has talked about it before. And 3D printing is a phenomenal technology we have. But so Colorado, it's already illegal. It's been illegal for many years now, I think since 2023, to manufacture your own firearm. But under the previous bill, under the previous law until this bill, there was a path forward. So say you manufactured your own firearm, you could actually go to a FFL, a federal firearm licensee dealer, and get it registered and get it serialized. Not really registered, but get it serialized so it can be tracked in the event of a crime. And you can actually have a path forward to do that and legally own your own self-manufactured gun. This bill says we don't want to do that anymore. We don't think people should be able to build guns whatsoever. And 3D printing, there's this big issue, and it's this big scary thing out there where anybody can manufacture a firearm in their homes. So we've seen this across the country too. Washington has an extremely restrictive 3D printing gun ban going right now. That's actually could ban 3D printer sales in the state on some level, depending on how that bill ends up ending up. California is doing something very similar where the 3D printers would have to track the technology to track what you're printing. And if it thought it was a gun ping, it wouldn't allow you to do it. I mean, there's so much, it's the people who are writing these bills, as usual, have no idea how the technology actually works. And it's impractical and doesn't make any sense because how do you know what that's supposed to be? The 3D printer's not smart enough to know that piece is going to be a gun piece anyways. So this bill originally was pretty bad. It's still bad, don't get me wrong, but originally possession of digital files was going to be a class 5 misdemeanor. Possession of digital files. So you have a a line of code on your computer that tells you how to print a rapid fire trigger device, like a switch, or a receiver for a firearm, you're going to jail. Second offense, you're a felon now, and you can never legally own a firearm again. That was the bill. They did amend that out on this when it passed on second reading last Friday, but they still left in distribution of digital files. So if you post a link to the catalog or one of these websites that has 3D printed gun files on it, you are committing a crime in Colorado if this goes forward. So it's basically, in my mind, modern day book burning or book banning, right? Because you could have a book, you could say, oh yeah, here's because it's just code. You could write it down and print it out on a paper. And then you're like, oh yeah, I'm handing out this book that tells you how to print a firearm. And you're a criminal now in Colorado if this bill goes forward. So that's how they're getting to do it, is basically saying if you're distributing the files or you're printing them themselves, which was already kind of illegal. So the bill, of course, is relatively unenforceable because people can still buy 3D printers and have 3D printers and do this. Who's going to know? But nonetheless, it's not a good bill. It's a bad idea, and definitely is going to put maybe potentially well-intentioned people behind bars. People have no intention of actually hurting anybody, right? They're just peaceful gun owners. So bad news there. So there's a lot of anti-gun stuff. The registration of barrels, firearm barrels, that's the other big one that just made it out of the Senate on third reading on Monday as well. Basically saying that if you want to buy a barrel for your rifle, your handgun, you have to go to a federal firearms dealer, an FFL, and they're going to create a registry of everybody who buys a firearm barrel. They're not serialized parts, so they're just going to write down your information and what you bought. I mean, the idea is the idea of some people in our state legislature, like Senator Tom Sullivan, is to eliminate gun ownership, ultimately. And it's not a surprise. I mean, I was sitting in committee when Stephen Woodrow was like, I want to ban handguns. Like, you know what I mean? They want to do these things. They're not, not all of them do, don't get me wrong, but they can work around the edges to really push some of the bad stuff. So the gun stuff is bad. One of the most crazy bills this last week was, I want to say it was 1021, was the price control bill. It was in the new, I think the Denver Post had an article about it today. So basically, the argument is this. You're being gouged by greedy corporations when you go see a Nuggets game or a Broncos game, because they're gouging you because that hot dog's $10, because that beer's $15, and that should be illegal. That's a crime. You know what I mean? So that was the bill. That was the bill, basically saying we need to have price controls and say if you are 10% over market rate of what similar products are selling for in the county, then you are committing a deceptive trade practice, and the Attorney General can fine you ridiculously. The airport, hospitals, and then sports arenas and stadiums and things like that. But no, it was an absolutely crazy bill. And we had pretty much every chamber of commerce, every type of business group testifying against this bill. The bill did die in committee. I testified on it as well. But we had people from the Colorado State Fair there speaking. And they're like, you don't understand, like the logistics. We build a city for the state fair that's there for a month. And if they can't sell what they need to sell, they're not going to be there. Like they have to charge a certain amount to make it worth their time for this very short amount of time to give up every other part of their life and come here for weeks on end and sell these beers and these funnel cakes and this and that. And you want to say that the guy who's selling the hot dogs at the stand outside Home Depot, they got to compete against him now? Well, they can't do it. They just can't do it. The math doesn't work. You know what I mean? And I was making the point too. I'm like, yeah, if they're price gouging the beer, and they're saying, yeah, oh yeah, that beer, it's a 16 ounce at the bar across the street, but in the stadium, it's a 20 ounce, but the price is, 3 times higher. I mean, you're going to get the situation where the Attorney General is like tracking price per ounce of beer in the county for a specific date that there's a complaint. I mean, is this really the proper role? Is this what we have our priorities set on as a state? I mean, where they're saying, okay, well, that was a hot dog, but was it a kosher hot dog? Well, no, that was an all beef hot dog. So what's the monetary value there? They're charging more? Well, it's not the same thing, right? It's not the same thing. So it was crazy. And this is Yara Zokai and some others there. Kyle Brown is the other one. Some of the legislators there who are pushing this. But yeah, ultimately they killed it. Democrats killed the bill, a vote to 7-4 because they heard that it's untenable. It doesn't make sense. There's no way you're going to put people out of business. Price controls create shortages, right? Because you got to think, like last time I was at Ball Arena, sure, it was a little expensive, but they had like 10 people working at that concession stand. You know what I mean? They're packed full of people because they have to, it's a break in the game or the concert. They got to get people in and out. Well, now all of a sudden you're saying, well, we got to lower the prices. Well, now we can't pay 10 people to work there. We can pay 3 people to work there. So now the line is all the way, you know what I mean? So you're just creating other problems. You're creating other situations. So absolutely ridiculous. But these are the things that happen in our state legislature, and it's absolutely wild. And I think more people need to pay attention. Of course, housing has been another big part of the equation. One of the worst bills I've seen this year did die in committee too, thankfully. It was one of the first bills to be killed this year. And that was to allow local governments to create taxes on vacant properties. The idea being if you have a second home up in the mountains and you're not there all the time, you should pay extra taxes to make up for the fact that you're not there. And then that money is going to go into an affordable housing fund. So basically you create a situation then, talk about the surveillance state, where you have a county assessor driving by your house and be like, okay, you weren't there. You're only there 4 days out of the month, And it's like, this is the system they want to build around, where they're keeping track of how often you're at your home or your property and your residential property, and then saying, we're going to tax you extra because of it. But I don't know if enough of the legislators own second properties or what, but they killed the bill. They didn't like it. So wild stuff. And of course, it was really interesting to see because some of the mountain communities were supportive of it, because they're like, hey, yeah, if you're able to tax these people and bring us money so we can build affordable housing for like ski workers and stuff, that's what they want, right? They don't care how they get the money. They just want it to happen. But ultimately, it's a total affront to property rights. And this idea that if you own your property, can't I decide how often I stay at that property or not? What if I'm on an extended vacation? What if I'm going to go work overseas for 6 months? You know what I mean? I used to work on cruise ships. If I left and it was gone for 7 months at a time, now all of a sudden I owe extra taxes because I wasn't like shopping at the local store or something like that. You know what I mean? Talk about an invasion into our personal lives. So that bill died. So a lot of crazy stuff, folks. And like I said, there's nearly 500 bills, memorials, and resolutions that have already been introduced in the Capitol at the state legislature. We're only halfway through the session. So it's crazy. They're banning pet sales also. Pet stores can't sell dogs and cats anymore. You have to go through a breeder, basically, but brokers won't exist and this and that. And I get it. There's a concern about puppy mills and this and that. But it's like all this intervention into our lives ultimately leads to nowhere good, as we know, right? So craziness there. But I kind of want to transition now into the other big story of the year for politics, and that's the election, right? Go ahead.
I want you to mention 1289, simply because that's that Zokai's tax expenditure one. But one of the components of 1289 is adding sales tax to gold.
Yeah, Reed and I were talking about that before we started. I'm not as familiar on that bill. I need to be, but definitely. So the idea is, this is crazy, right? We're in a situation here in Colorado where affordability is the number one issue, right? People are struggling to survive. Inflation's through the roof. Our grocery bill is outrageous. We're in a rough spot for most people, or just barely making ends meet. Jobs are leaving. The biggest employer just left the state, this and that. Not that I'm a fan of Palantir, don't get me wrong, but they were gone. But you know what I mean? So there's a lot of economic uncertainty in the world right now, obviously, especially with overseas oil, this and that. So, the state budget took a big hit with H.R. 1. I mean, that is the reality of it, right? Regardless of your partisan talking points, when the One Big Beautiful Bill Act passed last year, H.R. 1, it basically extended tax cuts that had been enacted during Trump's first presidency, made them permanent, and basically this and that. Ultimately, I think it was a good thing because we're paying less taxes. Businesses are paying less taxes. Employers are paying less taxes. That's a good thing ultimately, right? If we believe in a good economy. So because of that, though, the way our state government structured their budget, they expected these tax cuts to end. And of course, they thought that nothing will ever change, right? When it comes to federal spending, federal money, this and that. Tax policy will never change because, whatever. So anyways, it did. So the state government now has a huge deficit. And that's why we're not getting our Tabor refunds, because that's another portion of the equation, is because they're not collecting enough money. The economy's struggling itself, right? Employers are leaving. Sure, there's a growth in jobs, but it's like 90% government jobs that are growing. Private sector jobs are growing like this much. It's rough and this and that. So the government's not collecting the money they need. That's step one, right? They're collecting less money last year, and part of it's because of the tax cuts, right? So the taxes get cut. Now the state government, because they have so much of the tax policy in Colorado coupled with federal tax policy, when there's a tax cut at the federal level, there's a tax cut at the local level in Colorado, right? So now all of a sudden the state government lost a lot of tax revenue. So their plan, the big plan they have that they introduced this package of 3 bills a couple weeks ago that are going to be heard next week in committee, is to basically close these loopholes in tax policy. And one of them is this exemption on taxing bullion and precious metals and things like that, so your coins. So basically, they're basically going to increase taxes. Now, of course, from an economic perspective, this is the worst possible time to do it. We're in a struggling economy. There's so much uncertainty. People are already living on the edge. Employers are fleeing the state of Colorado. There's questions about our energy grid, this and that. So now all of a sudden, you're going to squeeze employers a little bit more. You're going to squeeze businesses a little bit more, right? You start squeezing them too much, they either leave or then they just can't hire people. And that's not good either, right? You have a negative feedback loop then. So we're in a situation where they're going to increase taxes by eliminating these tax, what would I just call them? Not tax credits, but basically deductions, write-offs, these things that they've had for a while. So now businesses won't be, this is what they did during the special session last year too, you know? So right now, like in Colorado, it used to be where you have to collect sales tax as a business owner, right? And the state government would let you keep a very small portion of it to make up the cost because it takes time. There's accounting, the equipment, this and that. They got rid of that last year in the special session. So we've seen this pattern now where they can't outright raise taxes without asking the voters. And most voters are probably going to say no, although we'll see what happens with this progressive income tax scheme. But ultimately what they can do is get rid of the tax credits or the tax deductions and things like that and say, hey, listen, just because the federal government's not taxing your overtime, for example, doesn't mean we can't tax it. Now, I got to say, though, this last weekend, I was shocked. I was shocked to see it make it out of committee was a bill to end taxation on overtime here in Colorado. And it did pass. They tried during the special session last year. It didn't go anywhere. I didn't even look at it. Like, it was Friday late in the day. I didn't even care to look. And then I saw it later online. I was like, it wasn't even worth checking to see if it was going to pass or not, but it ended up passing out of committee. We'll see what actually ends up happening with that bill. Not too confident, but basically the plan of the Democrat majority right now in Colorado through their package of bills is to raise taxes on employers and businesses in Colorado to help close that budget gap. They want more money that they can spend. That's going to be a bad thing for people in Colorado, especially going into election year. So we'll see what happens there. And part of it, and I need to do more research, is on precious metals. So your silver, your gold, your coins, things like that. And starting to tax those now. And as Reed brought up earlier, I mean, people, when we were talking before this, people are just going to go out of state. I mean, you have a $2,000, $3,000 gold coin, $5,000 gold coin. Why not drive to Cheyenne or go somewhere else? I mean, you're talking taxation on that level. The equation changes a little bit where you're going to go out of state and buy your gold coins or silver coins, or people are just going to do it under the table, you know? So it'll be very interesting to see, but that's not good from a pro-liberty perspective at all. But let's talk a little bit about the election this year. Huge election, of course, obviously. We'll see what happens. It's going to be so much spending, so much stuff. The biggest race is the governor's race. And I think that's one of the most interesting things. There's a lot of fighting, of course, right now between Michael Bennet and Phil Weiser. Weiser's playing to the left a little bit, but and really hyping up his lawsuit. He launched lawsuits against the Trump administration every single week last year. He's at like 50 to 60 lawsuits right now against the Trump administration. That's his little claim to fame he's really focusing on for the election. But neither of these people are really getting a lot of excitement that I could tell, at least. It'd be very interesting to see that fight on the Democratic side. The Republican side, you know, I'm not convinced a Republican can win a statewide race in Colorado in 2026. I'm really not. But of course, one of the biggest stories, one of the most interesting stories is this Victor Marx character. Guy who appears out of nowhere, who's got all the money, all the connections. He's tied into this right-wing podcasting network. He's raising more money than anybody has ever raised on the Republican side. It's really fascinating. And a part of me hopes he's the candidate for the Republican side because I want to see some down ballot races have a positive effect from that, you know, because he's going to have more money and more support and more excitement with his campaign than anybody else. And I've said this before, and I know I'm being recorded, but I think Barb Kirkmeyer is the most qualified person in the race on the Republican side. Like, she's done it all, right? County commissioner, state's legislator for a long time, joint budget committee. She knows the state government, the state budget better than any other person. Almost anybody in the state probably, right? But she doesn't excite anybody. Nobody's interested. Nobody's like jumping up and down, right? Like rallying behind her. She's not an inspiring candidate. Scott Bottoms for the grassroots Republicans. He's like their guy, right? You see, at least I see him on social media. But it's a small pond he's playing in. You know, when it comes to the right and the grassroots and the religious right and this and that, he's the biggest figure there is. But he can't raise money, and nobody knows who he is outside of that little ecosystem, you know what I mean? Or Victor Marx, if he can bring in, I mean, in January alone, he brought in $250,000. He had $600,000 raised between October when he announced and the end of December. Scott Bottoms in his campaign account had $7,000 in his campaign account at the end of December. Victor Marx had $600,000, and more than everybody else combined. So I still think the Democrat's going to win probably ultimately, you know, but ultimately, you know, we get the biggest candidate out there is going to get the most excitement, generate the most noise. I think nobody can do it besides Victor Marx, aside from all his baggage and who knows what personal issues he has and all that kind of stuff, right? That's a separate issue. But we'll see. I mean, there's a good opportunity, I think, for Republicans to pick up potentially 5 state House seats, 3 state Senate seats. And I think that'd be a good thing because it would restore some balance in our state government because we have such a one-sided, one-party rule that's leading us in the wrong direction. I mean, most people in Colorado, I don't think are happy with the direction it's going. According to the polls, they're not. They don't necessarily like the Republicans or trust them, but when it comes to their pocketbook and their wallet, I think they might make an exception. It just depends on that specific candidate. So we'll see. Of course, caucuses started last night. If anybody's involved in the caucus process, we got a lot of county assemblies coming up this weekend. So that's going to be a big story. And then the Republican Assembly coming up, I want to say in April, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll see who ends up being the candidates to get on the June primary ballot. So it's a long haul, a big process. But of course, the election, I'm glad I don't have cable TV because I live in Congressional District 8, which is Gabe Evans' district. They're already running ads. Like they were running ads last year on both sides. They're going to spend tens of millions of dollars, buku bucks, like insane amount of money, because that's one of the biggest races in the state of Colorado is Congressional District 8. And they really think they can flip that. And they might flip it. But we're going to see so much spending up there. It's like, I hate living in that district for election year because it's just going to be nonstop, 10 mailers in the mailbox every single day, ads nonstop on YouTube, this and that. So it's very interesting to see. Yeah, you have a question?
What's the likelihood, if any, of Dorito primarying Gabe Evans?
So there's this guy named Adam Dorito up in Weld County who's running a Republican primary campaign against Gabe Evans. I don't think he has a chance. I don't think he does. He doesn't have the name recognition. He doesn't have the money. He doesn't have... He's got a little bit of grassroots support. We're seeing a little bit of grassroots insurgency, like Hope Scheppelman running against Jeff Hurd. She's aligned herself with Adam Dorito. So we see this little bit of a grassroots insurgency with those two candidates on the congressional level. But I don't think they're going to get enough traction. I don't think they have the money. And I mean, Gabe Evans, we're going to see so much DC money from the Republican side coming into Colorado. I mean, I wish Gabe Evans voted more like a libertarian, but he wants the Republican money from Washington. This is my personal opinion. I don't have any inside information on this. I don't really know. But ultimately, he's going to do what the speaker says because the speaker is going to say, we're going to spend money in your race or not. So I think the money I think Gabe Evans ultimately is the only one who's going to get that money. If Dorito's the candidate, he doesn't have that kind of pull. You know what I mean? If Dorito ends up beating Evans in the primary, I think it's over. But we'll see. I mean, it's a big fight on the left side too. I mean, we got Manny Rutinel, who's crazy, far left extremist, in my opinion, because he's anti-agriculture, anti-oil and gas, running in Weld County and the eastern part of Colorado. I don't think a lot of the Republicans hope he's the candidate because he's much more beatable. You know what I mean? And then you got Shannon Byrd, who's the more respectable, more moderate Democrat who resigned recently, of course, so she could focus on full-time campaigning. But the grassroots doesn't like her. She's too moderate. So she's not going to get that support. But ultimately, we know young people don't necessarily vote either. So, she's probably the better candidate in terms of getting the older voters out there who vote in every single election and get that kind of support. But we'll see. But yeah, did you have a follow-up to that?
I suppose you probably want to talk about some of these House races as well, if you have time. If you have time about some of these other House races too, any commentary?
Yeah, I think there's some good opportunity at the House level. I think really the Senate, the biggest thing is let me start there. We got Senate District 3 down in Pueblo. Nick Henrikson's not running for re-election. And I didn't bring up, speaking of Nick Henrikson, I didn't bring up the most controversial or biggest bill in the state legislature this year, which is Senate Bill 97, to decriminalize prostitution at all levels. And it's such an interesting debate from a libertarian perspective, right? Because libertarians were supposed to support that kind of thing. But at the same time, I don't know. Any opinions here? Does anybody support the full-scale decriminalization of prostitution in Colorado here in 2026? Maybe a little bit, somewhat.
I'm going to start the curveball ranch in Boulder County.
I mean, the biggest problem with that bill, from my perspective, I'm a big believer in the decentralization of political power. And this is how Amendment 64 got passed as well. Like Amendment 64 that decriminalized marijuana said that local municipalities, local governments can still outlaw it if they wanted. Like they don't have to allow it, right? Like Colorado Springs didn't allow it just until recently. Greeley doesn't allow marijuana dispensaries. That was kind of the balance they struck. Communities that want marijuana can have it. Communities that don't want it. I kind of like that idea. I like the idea of each community making their own decisions because who am I to tell them what's best for them? Boulder wants to do what Boulder wants to do. Springs wants to do what they want to do. Let them do it, right? That's my perspective. Greeley, we want to do what we want to do. Let's leave it up to the people living there, right? The problem with Senate Bill 97, the prostitution bill, is it basically has a preemption clause in it that says no state, county, or no county and no municipality, no local government jurisdiction can criminalize prostitution whatsoever. That's the problem. So now all of a sudden you're going to have a lot of scenarios set up in my mind that's going to be, well, hey, it's forcibly legal. Like you can't opt out of it at the local level. Your community doesn't want it. Too bad. So That's the balance I don't think they struck with this bill, and I don't think they expect it to pass ultimately, but it'll be very interesting to see. So Senate District 3, Nick, do you have a question, Artem?
So, do you think it will be kind of smoke screen? So it's just a noise to take attention, or it's actual bill? What is your opinion?
I think that we call a lot of these things messaging bills, right? Like they're messaging bills to send a message to the electorate, to get people talking, to kind of create a narrative, but they know they're not going to pass. We see this from Republicans a lot, of course, So I think they know it's a messaging bill. I think they know it's not going to pass, but I think they wanted to start the conversation, and I think they wanted to move in that direction. I mean, Henriksen himself thinks he's a libertarian. He calls himself a libertarian. He loves this idea. He thinks it's a good idea, consenting adults doing what they want. I mean, I get that. Lorena Garcia is one of the other prime sponsors who's Democratic Socialist of America, and she wants to decriminalize sex work and help the sex workers out in this and that. So they're true believers is what I'm trying to say. That's what I'm getting at this. Lisa Cutter, the senator from Arvada, from Jeffco, I was shocked to see her on there because she's like a former school board person, but I don't know. I don't know what her angle was. But at least I can understand from some of the other perspectives that they're true believers in this. And but I think they know it's not going to go anywhere. I mean, it'll be very interesting to see. I mean, I thought 7 hours of testimony on this bill. You're going to see every single municipality, every single law enforcement. You're going to see people coming out of the woodwork to testify against this bill. When it makes it to committee, if it does. Well, I mean, it will make it to committee now, but it'll be very interesting to see how it goes. But Craig's question earlier about the districts that can flip. I mean, we can go into that offline. U.S. House races. I mean, I really think Congressional District 8 is the only one that's flippable. I don't think Boebert's going anywhere. I don't think Crank's going anywhere. Maybe if that's the next one that would go probably if we get to that point. But I don't think so. Senate, 7. Well, I mean, no, the rest of them are too secure, I think. We might see a little movement, but I don't think it's going to be enough of a majority. Oh, you're talking about for that? So that's the other interesting name. So we have John Hickenlooper, our former governor, former mayor of Denver, Wine Coop Brewery, right? Big guy there. Everybody loves Hickenlooper, moderate, middle of the road, moderate guy. But the Democrats on the left don't like him because he's voted for all of Trump's nominees. He's too moderate. He's too pro-Trump, this and that. So he's getting primaried by Senadora Julie Gonzalez, who actually voted for Senate Bill 51 to require your birthday with the OS systems. I was kind of shocked to see that, but she actually voted for that. I don't think she's got it. It's very interesting. She's got the youth vote, and you got all the people on the left, the Deep Sing people, and all these other people who are very excited about her campaign. But I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I don't think she can get the money necessarily that Hickenlooper can, and I don't think, like I said earlier, it's old people who vote for that's how it is. Young people, they can talk and they love Bernie and AOC and this and that, and they may be, and she's trying to tap into that. But they don't show up, especially not to primary elections. You know what I mean? They don't. It's going to be the old blue hairs who are part of the Democratic establishment forever. They're the ones who are going to show up and get Hickenlooper back as the nominee, and then he's going to win. You know what I mean? In November. So that's ultimately kind of the thought there. So I don't think the Senate's going to move. It'll be very interesting, though, to see if Bennett becomes governor and then he gets to appoint the next U.S. senator. So people always talk in the background, is him and Polis making a deal where Polis is going to get appointed to Senate if he backs Bennett and Bennett becomes, so we'll see. I don't know. There's a lot of interesting dynamics there that could happen. So I'll be very curious to see what happens.
So you mentioned earlier that with the flock technology and the facial recognition spying and everything, one of the challenges with getting Republicans involved is that they support the police officers. But I'm kind of curious from what Republicans pretend to believe in terms of privacy and everything, how they justify that, and then how the police officers justify these warrantless searches and spying on us and everything.
How do they justify it? I mean, ultimately, and how does it contradict maybe their more constitutionally minded things? I mean, it shows the split. Ultimately, for me, it shows the split. There's a reason we only have, in my mind, a couple good Republicans in there. We have 2 good Republican senators, and we maybe have 4 good Republican House members. That's it. From a liberty perspective, from a libertarian perspective, the rest of them are all going to support whatever the cops tell them to jump. They're going to say how high. You know what I mean? They love government. They just love their version of government, just like the Democrats do. They just have different priorities in terms of how they want to run our lives. So from a libertarian perspective, I'm hopeful and excited because we at least have a few of them up there. Yeah. How do the police justify? Because it works. They don't, it's not, for them, think of it like they're on mission. You know what I mean? They want to catch the bad guy. They want to hold him accountable. They want to solve the crime. And all the power to them for that. All the laud them, celebrate that, whatever, good. That's what they should be doing. But ultimately, I think they're less concerned. they're not constitutionalists. You know what I mean? That's not a requirement to be a law enforcement officer. And I think that's why the sheriff component is so interesting, right? Electing our sheriffs and making sure they adhere to constitutional values. In Weld County, we got a pretty good one, and we got an election coming up to replace them. And that's the big debate: is are they going to be as pro-liberty and pro-constitution as our previous one? And how's that going to work? Because the sheriff can ultimately be more responsive. He's elected directly by the people. He or she are elected directly by the people. So they're more accountable to people, not accountable to the city council or city government. So that's the best opportunity there, I think, to try and preserve our constitutional rights is through sheriff. But I think the normal cops, they don't care about the Constitution one way or another, lip service maybe, but they don't think about it. It's just about catching the bad guys. So whatever it takes, they'll do it.
Yeah, tell that to that lady down in Columbine Valley with the package on her door.
Yeah, the video I put out today, I played her entire testimony. She spoke on Senate Bill 70 last week where, a flock camera saw her. They basically were going to arrest her for stealing a package off somebody's porch. She didn't do it at all. She had a dash cam. She had all of this, but they wouldn't believe her because the flock cameras caught her vehicle driving there multiple times. And they said it was her. And she ended up having to miss work and going this and that. And they were going to arrest her and this and that. She had to fight it and prove her innocence. And she had nothing to do with it. It's an incredible testimony to listen to and hear her story. Of course, national headlines last year when it happened.
I just comment with where the Republicans coming in on the privacy issue, child trafficking. That would be the biggest thing. I wanted to comment going back to the prostitution. I did a history search, and we've been going over this discussion a long time. Republicans have said, let's decriminalize. It's gone on and on. Came to my attention researching it that right now with escort services, the escort has to make a log of both the client and themselves. That contractual agreement is written, basically opening the door for the legislature. So even right now, there's a documentation process. So when you ask who supports it, it all comes down to the fine print, right? The reporting systems, the taxation, the licensure, which is government revenue and all those things. So I thought it was interesting, but even going back one further, what is prostitution? Like there was an old article in the New York Times about a lady who I'm not into all this stuff, so I don't know, sado and masochism stuff. And so going to court, she said, basically, I don't touch these guys. All I do is I'm beating them up, turns them on. That's not prostitution. So this opens up a really look at OnlyFans and whatever. It's how do you even put an end on that, especially with AI stuff, et cetera. So I'm done now.
No, it's fascinating, and it's very interesting to see what's going to happen with all that, and it starts the conversation and it moves the ball in that direction. I think the bill sponsors know it's not going to pass this year, but they're moving us in that direction. So fascinating stuff, and a lot of concerns about trafficking, though. Colorado is already one of the biggest states for trafficking, sex trafficking, especially of children and other people. So it's a bad. You could potentially make a bad situation worse, potentially, right? That's the concern, but who knows what's going to happen there. Any other questions?
I was just going to comment on some of the privacy stuff because that's what I follow the most. So with the operating system bill, it's particularly insidious because it's very difficult to get around because it's in the operating system. Now, one good thing about that, I believe, is that the current bill, I think, does not require you to submit an ID. And I think you mentioned that. It's just a yes or no. Are you above 18 or no?
Just put your birthday in there
or
your
birthday.
age.
Okay.
So you can put your age or a birthday.
Yeah. So that's mostly useless in terms of actually stopping anything. But that actually might create a lot of data collection if someone wanted to target children. That's a honeypot that they could go after. So that's kind of a sketchy way to look at that. But then, of course, I think if you follow the powers that be, it's very clear that they are trying to push a digital ID on the entire world, and it's going to be one step at a time. Agenda 2030 was not just a conspiracy theory. It's a real thing pushed by multiple different organizations. So they're going to try and track everyone online. I presented on this a few months ago that they're trying to criminalize VPN usage because they don't want you to be private. And the UK is going hard on this, and Brazil and that sort of thing. And then also on the cameras, the flock cameras thing, there was a lot of people pushing back against that in Denver. But if I believe correctly, the city council voted it down to expand the APLR cameras, and the mayor overrode it, and he increased the budget. So it does seem like, how Tom Woods always says, no matter who you vote for, you get John McCain at the federal level. It seems like at the local level, no matter who you vote for, you always get a communist.
Yeah, the flock issue last year was really interesting because, the city council voted it down, but the mayor can make his own decisions up to a certain dollar amount. So this is what flock does. And they'll say, okay, well, we're going to cut you a deal. We're going to come in $5 under the limit that you have in terms of what you can do and prove on your own. So that's what they did. And then, so they did end the contract with Flock, which a lot of people were celebrating. And then the article in Denverite the next day was like, well, now they're searching for the next license plate reader company. You know what I mean? And so it's not really about the privacy concerns. It was about it was ICE getting that information, right? So it's a bigger conversation, and unfortunately, they're still moving ahead in Denver to put in new license plate readers and cameras to surveil our every move. They just want to make sure that it's not used to go after immigrants; it's used to go after everybody else. So, we still have a ways to go in terms of that debate.
The company's called Axon.
Axon, they do body cameras too for cops.
I don't really want to change the conversation because I care a lot about privacy, but a lot of this stuff is not new information to me. So what is new information that was kind of surprising to me was that just how messed up our budget is. Like the deficit that you were talking about is pretty serious. It's like on the order of like $1 billion. And states can't like really run operating deficits. Our ability to create issue debt or bonds is pretty restricted from a constitutional level. Tabor is actually pretty rock solid in many ways, though they're going to try to find creative ways to get around it. It's funny, Grok is actually pretty white-pilled on this. It says like, oh, there's no way they can tax us more or like really, because like it's saying like, they're going to be forced to cut spending. And I almost kind of can't reconcile that with how I know leftists think, because they're just like magical thinkers. They think they can just apply their force. And so I'm just curious, like, is Grok wrong to be white-pilled on the fact that like we're facing this structural deficit and, we're going to be forced to cut Medicaid pretty sharply?
They're going to have to cut Medicaid if they're cutting anything. It's the largest expenditure in the budget. It's ballooned like crazy recently. So when the federal government stops subsidizing it so much, and then there's tax cuts, they have to make some cuts. So they're going to have to make some cuts. We saw last year House Joint Resolution 1023 where they were going to try and repeal Tabor or Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. So their biggest avenue of attack is trying to get a progressive income tax, repeal Tabor, go that way, eliminate the revenue cap when it comes to certain carve-outs like education. We're going to see those attempts, things like that. So, but ultimately they're going to have to cut the budget because it's just ballooned too much. Especially the Medicaid piece of it. It used to be education, but now Medicaid dwarfs everything. So, government-run healthcare, of course, it's going to be more expensive than they expect. So they're going to have to make some cuts. It'll be very interesting to see, but then they're going to try and raise taxes and do other tricks to do it. But the fiscal situation, the Colorado state budget is not good in terms of the government's perspective. It's good for us because, less money they have is potentially more freedom for us.
Well, for sure. Starve the beast. Am I right? That said, I honestly am really puzzled as to like how this is actually going to play out, because it seems like on one side you have like an immovable object, and then you have it's just one of those things like I can't. It's really hard for me to even believe. And here's the other thing: Hickenlooper and Polis, they're not the worst. Like, they're really not the worst. No, they're actually pretty moderate in many ways, ironically enough. I know that's controversial to say, but like there are some Democrats from the state who are not like bleeding heart lefties, And so like maybe, but still, I just see all this nonsense come up, and I don't know. I'm really puzzled how we're going to get through this. You can't have $1 billion deficit as a state. That's like we're literally constitutionally mandated to balance the budget.
Yeah. So we'll see what they try, and then we'll see cuts otherwise. But that's it'll be one of the more interesting conversations going through the rest of the year for sure. And maybe we'll see another special session, the not so special session. They're doing them every year now, it seems. So would not be shocked or surprised to see something like that. But very potential there, and perfect.
That's our talk. Give it up for Brandon Wark.